the shore I stand alone. Ocean's whisper calls my name. Depth and longing in my soul, seeking more than just this game. Waves crash softly at my feet, echoes in my heart so deep. Eyes on horizon far and true, longing for a love so steep. Deep calls to deep inside of me, where the sky meets endless sea. Heartbeats blend with ocean's roar, seeking depth I can't ignore. Echoes in my heart so deep, eyes on horizon far and true, longing for a love so steep. Deep calls to deep inside of me, where the sky meets endless sea. Heartbeats blend with ocean's roar, seeking depth I can't ignore. Shells and sand beneath my toes, tides reveal what ebb and flows. In the quiet still I hear whisper longings crystal clear. Deep calls to deep inside of me, where the sky meets endless sea. Heartbeats blend with ocean's roar, seeking depth I can't ignore. Desire, burning with the holy fire. Depth of love beyond all dreams, in the vastness it redeems. Deep calls to deep inside of me, where the sky meets endless sea. Heartbeats blend with ocean's roar, seeking depth I can't ignore.
Alrighty, hey everybody, welcome to When Deep Calls Deep. It's been a while since we have done a live stream over here, so it's kind of fun to get back on to things calming down enough so I have some time to do some stuff on my own channel. So welcome everybody. It's great to see Nunya's here, Josh Davidson coming over from Faith and Altar, Jimmy the Gent. It's always good to see you, and Shannon. Good to see you guys. And I have with me tonight, I'm so excited about this, you guys. This is going to be awesome. I have a good friend here, Adam. Some of you guys know him as Lingus Amo on YouTube. He's got a great channel. I would say as soon as we're done, everybody go over there. If you haven't subscribed to Adam's channel yet, definitely do it. Definitely do it. He's got really good stuff. He is as into the ancient Near East nerdy stuff as I am into canonical narrative and storytelling. So Lingus Amo. So it's the link is in the description down underneath. Adam, welcome to When Deep Calls Deep. I'm so excited that you're here. How are you?
I'm doing great, actually. A little tired. It's a little later on the East Coast over here. 9:30 over here. So, but I'm doing great. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so like I said, I'm just so excited that you came over and come join us over here on my little channel. Where we have a lot of Old Testament fun over here. So that's what we are talking tonight about, one of my favorite things. So a lot of people don't quite know that when you start out and you're a prophets major, you spend a lot of time in Torah. And I didn't really realize that either when I started, but I had to get a whole lot of knowledge of Torah first, because everything they say is all about Torah. So understanding Torah is important, especially to understand not just the prophets, but the whole Bible. We have a basic of our faith is anchored in Torah. So if we don't get Torah right, we're going to get everything else wrong. It's that I think there's this thing of a friend of mine, Troy, likes to talk about where, if you two of you are going in the same direction to circumnavigate the globe, and if one of you has your compass that's just like even 1 degree off, by the time you get all the way around, you're going to end up in like Mississippi or somewhere, or like Missouri or somewhere crazy like that. So, if our understanding of Torah is off, then the whole rest of our understanding of scripture, I mean, even most, everything that Jesus says is straight out of Torah. He's just laying it down out of Torah all day long. So if we don't understand Torah itself, then we definitely are going to be off. So, and I know that Adam loves to talk Torah as much as I do, which is one of the reasons that I asked him to come.
Pretty much.
Like, loves to talk about the ancient Near East stuff. So we are going to start off. This is the first of my series of now 5. I added one to this because there's so much good stuff to talk about Torah. And I
didn't know there would be a 5th one. Oh, well, I'm excited.
I added one because I thought, I should probably go through and do a breakdown of the books themselves in what we call Torah, and just kind of understand the narrative story that's happening throughout those first 5 books, because it is so important. So I added that in. So that's a super bonus for everybody and totally fun for me in my wheelhouse. So, but we're going to start, Adam, what in the heck is Torah anyway? We're using this word and we're talking about it. So what is it?
Excuse me. So Torah, basically in a nutshell, is a bunch of law collection, is a law collection that is usually classified as civil or criminal. Excuse me. Apparently I have a frog in my throat. And it has an epilogue at its basic level. I think normally in the A&E, and particularly in the Mesopotamia, instructions is a better term. Normally Torah is translated as law sometimes, and that can be a bit misleading, which we'll get into later. But I think instructions is a much better term. And I get that from John Walton, basically, in his book on ancient now, of course, I'm blanking on the title, but from John Walton, and how he defines what Torah is in its biblical setting, and then also in its ancient Near Eastern setting, more particularly aligning with the Mesopotamian laws like Code of Hammurabi and everything. But the instructions were basically meant to justify the king and his reign. And in Egypt, the focus was more on the instructions, at least their form of instructions were more on not so much justifying the king, but on ma'at, which is basically at its most simplified the way things should be or are. So that sort of changes when we approach Torah and the instructions in the Hebrew Bible. In Torah and Leviticus and Deuteronomy, it's usually divided between casuistic and apodictic laws, and those are just fancy terms for the apodictic laws. I think will help you understand, or at least help the viewers understand, what apodictic is, or I mean casuistic is. Apodictic laws are the ones that read "thou shalt not." So you got the 10 Commandments. Those are your apodictic laws, and then you got the casuistic laws, which are laid out in Leviticus and then laid out again in Deuteronomy. But the rest of the Torah is mostly made up of those casuistic instructions. And that there are good sets of instructions that I don't know if we're going to get into this this episode or not, but that predate the Torah. I might be going out of what I'm supposed to be going here.
Yeah. Well, let's step back just a second, because we're going to get into that
was a
more
lot.
in detail in a minute. Yeah, that was. So, but I want to start simple for people because I like simple. I'm a simple kind of person. I grew up in small farm towns. I'm all about simple, and we're going to just when we use the word Torah, let's talk about what we were. So I want to start with the 3 things that Torah isn't before we here's what it is.
Oh, okay.
And then we'll get into the nitty gritty in a minute. So like that was all really good stuff. But so Torah, what it's not simply just the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. Around here, we say Hebrew Bible because it was the first Bible and it was written in Hebrew. So around here we refer to it as the Hebrew Bible. So people who are new, when we say old Hebrew Bible, we mean Old Testament usually. So there you go. But it's not simply just the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. It's bigger than that. So And I think where the confusion sometimes comes from, and we'll get into this more a little bit later, but this term that we think of when we think of Torah being law comes from the fact that the Septuagint translated that word nomos, which is law in Greek. So thank you, Greek, again, for causing
Right.
confusion. And that is, yeah, but it's what the first, and that's actually what the first 5 books are called in Jewish tradition, Torah, called, the instructions, which is Genesis to Deuteronomy. And then there's the second section, which is the Nevi'im, which is my favorite. That's the prophets. That's the former and the latter prophets, which some people don't understand, like Joshua and Judges are stuck in the Ketuvim as well. So it's bigger than a lot of people understand if you don't get into this nerdy part here. And then you've got the Ketuvim, which is everything else. That's kind of the junk drawer of the Hebrew Bible. It's just like, if it's not the prophets and it's not Torah, they stuck it in the 3rd section. And like, but Daniel is in there, interestingly enough. So I'm going to be working on a couple of Daniel videos that we're going to talk about why that's in there and not in the prophets, because that's fascinating. Okay, so it's not simply just the first 5 books. And it's not just a codified legal system post-Sinai Israel. So it's bigger and more complicated than that. And it's not simply just a list of the 631 or whatever. I can never remember the number off the top of my head. I think it's 631.
613. But...
Oh, 13. I inverted the 1 and the 3, but that was close enough. So we go for close enough around here sometimes. But it's not just a list of 613 laws that have to be followed under an old covenant that is now no longer relevant under the new covenant. So we're going to go that far, and we're going to say it's not completely irrelevant now either. So that's not what it is. So what is it then? So this is how I'm going to say that we're going to understand and talk about Torah starting now and going through the rest of my series here. So Torah is the narrative of the love of God that is given to his people as a liturgy for the praxis of faith to live in relationship with God and with neighbor, to bring those outside of relationship with God into relationship with God. That is that love of God lived out. So that's a very big, long Pauline sentence there to talk about what I think Torah is. I'm really good about about these big, long sentences. But so basically, let's just kind of break that down for a second. Torah, I think, is the narrative idea that explains how to live out the same love we receive from God, and that is supposed to be reciprocated with God, and it's also supposed to be shared with our neighbor. And what we consider the law, a Torah, like Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy, that we consider that the quote unquote law code is the wisdom of how do we do that? How do we show God's love back to God and to our neighbor? And if that had been done properly, they were set aside to show that hesed to the nations around, to bring all of the nations into community and commitment and covenant with God. So if we live out Torah, we are supposed to be a light to the nations around, is what is kind of where we're going with what Torah is. Torah is living out a relationship with God as demonstrated with your neighbors to bring people out of relationship with God into relationship with God. So that's, I think, where I'm going to say Torah is.
Yeah. Absolutely. You basically hit the nail on the head with that as far as Torah is concerned, and as far as its connection with not only Israel, but with the surrounding nations as well. I mentioned what the instructions were earlier between the different Mesopotamian Egypt. But it's completely different too with them. Like I said, they justify the king, or it was to keep balance. Torah in the Hebrew Bible is completely different in that it's supposed to bring the Israelites and the surrounding nations into right relationship with God. So, and I think Chesed, the Hebrew word Chesed, perfectly shows that or demonstrates that throughout the Hebrew Bible. So
Yeah, we are going to jump actually right into Hesed next, because
yeah.
Hesed, I think if you have to pick the defining attribute of God, it would be Hesed, which is translated. Oh, we're going to get into this. This is one of the things that I really am excited Adam is here for, because he is into all of like a lot of the biblical languages, and so he can explain some of this better than I can. I'm limited to Hebrew, and Adam has a much bigger range in his arsenal of languages over there. So, but this word chesed, I love this word. Actually, this word can take 20 minutes to actually explain what
Yeah.
this word means. So we're going to do our best to simplify that a little bit. So, we got all kinds of fun people coming here. BJ's here. Warren showed up. This is fun. All right. Steven's here. This is good.
Okay.
That's fun. Yeah. But Hesed, it's a complicated idea. It's more than just a definition. This is a complicated concept. This is the word, I think, that more than anything, and Adam, you can disagree with me if you want to here, but I think this is the word that embodies God more than anything, is this word Hesed,
Yeah.
because of the way that it's used, especially in the Hebrew Bible. It's a very difficult one to translate. You see it like loving kindness, steadfast love, tender love, faithful love, unfailing love, compassion, mercy, kindness, loyalty. But there's also, when you look in, like, especially like the prophets, like Ezekiel, chesed is suffering. It's not just long suffering. There is grief, torture. There is a lot that goes into being in chesed relationship with God. So we see that. And so Chesed, Adam, give us your take on Chesed.
So Chesed, usually I kind of like to go with the we can do with. I honestly think I can give the book dictionary, the dictionary definition of it, but I think you kind of summed it up with the um, mercy, kindness, loyalty. Those are other words that we choose to describe or translate what Chesed is. It's you, as matter of factly, you could translate that as literally the love of God as well. But I think one of my favorite, you could translate it as I wouldn't say joint obligation. Usually, if it's more in a familial sense, it can be like joint obligation between friends and family, host and guest. Solidarity is another way you could try to translate it. Faithfulness is another one. Grace and graciousness. So it could be translated, in the New Testament, as far as grace is as far as Paul translated and used the word for grace throughout the New Testament. Yeah, there's so many ways, backwards, forwards, ups, down, sideways, diagonal. However, it's just such a massive word that covers so much. That really reflects the love of God towards his people and towards us today, those who chose or choose to follow Christ. So
yeah, and I one of the things that and I think sometimes people don't always understand, like, there can be negative parts to Hesed. Like when Abraham invokes Chesed with Sarah to claim that she says that she's his sister instead of his wife when she's taken by Abimelech in Genesis 20. That is where the word Hesed is used there. Didn't work out very well for any of them in that situation.
no, no, not at all.
The word Hesed is used a lot in friendship relationships, like between David and Jonathan. We see that quite a bit. And in like Hosea 6,
yeah,
it's
Hosea
translated
6.
mercy. Yeah, Hosea 6, mercy is used a lot there too, as a translation. The LXX again likes to do that.
Yeah, when Jesus quotes it to the Pharisees, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. I think it's Chesed there for the translation for mercy. So
yeah. So this is a big word. It's one of my favorites. Like you said, you can use it between son and father in Genesis 47. Sorry, wife and husband in Genesis 20, friend to friend in 1 Samuel 20. A
Mhm.
general with the royal household in 2 Samuel 3. God and those in covenant with him in Genesis 24 and Deuteronomy 7. Like, it's got a lot of aspect. This is a big, big word. So, you'll hear a lot of us Hebrew nerds like just go crazy about every time the word
Yeah.
hesed comes up, because you're like, this is such a fun word to talk about because it's
Mm.
so huge and it's so many,
I
so
feel I
many
feel like
aspects to it.
I've done this before when I see it, and it's the Leonardo DiCaprio meme where he points at the screen, at the television screen. Chesed, there it is. I don't know if you know that meme. Anyway, I'm sorry, but I
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
get
No.
same way. I'm the same
Yeah.
way. Like I'll be pointing, there it is, there it is.
Yep. I know. I've got back on
So
the table. You can't really see them very well behind me. I've got my three favorite Hebrew words back on the table behind me on these little things that I made, and Hesed is
yeah.
one of those. So I've got Hesed and
Oh,
dwell
cool.
and return. So,
And
I
shoot.
love
Yeah.
shuv. Oh, shuv. Oh, you could
Shoot.
shuv.
Yeah.
Don't get me started on shuv. That's a fun word. If
That's
you love
another
the
one. That's
prophets,
another
that's
word that yeah, that's another one that can be defined.
I know. We
Like,
should do a fun Hebrew word video and just pick like our
oh,
4 favorite Hebrew words and just
crazy.
nerd out on
Nerd out on them.
Hebrew words.
Nefesh is another one.
Oh, I love the word
There's too
nefesh.
many nefesh.
Oh, that's awesome. All right, back on track.
So
Here we go. Like I said before, Hesed, I think, is the chief aspect of God's character in his relationship with others.
yes.
It is so amazing to me. Like, you see this word, it's used in the covenant relationship. And it's really interesting that it assumes that Hesed is reciprocal in the covenant. God gives Hesed to Israel and he expects Hesed in return. So it's
Hmm.
really interesting that we don't see, I don't think Israel quite ever gets that part of
Mm-mm.
their side of the covenant. Like, it just they didn't quite. I think they're a perfect example of how humans are thick, to use a British word.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
thick sometimes. And I think we
And
we didn't, and we see God, you know, always faithful in continuing to give his hesed, even when we're not
yeah.
faithful to reciprocate that back. And that's one of those covenant things when people are in a hurry to throw out the old covenant, so to speak, and say we're under a new one, that I think
Mhm.
gets lost in that, where we need to keep some aspects of the old covenant are kept. And that is one of them, is that chesed back and forth. I don't think that changes with Christ.
You wouldn't have had it in the New Testament. You wouldn't have that in the New Testament word for the Hebrew Bible. So I mean,
Right.
Chesed is it transcends both testaments.
Hmm.
It transcends just Judaism. It comes into
Hmm.
Christianity. Jesus brought it into Christianity and said, "Hey, this is what you should be doing to your neighbor." Chesed, if you know. So
Hmm.
you see that littered throughout the Hebrew Bible, and it's littered throughout the New Testament. And Paul picks it up right where Jesus left it. So yeah, it's a very important concept. It's extremely important concept, and really without it, I don't think you have Judaism or Christianity.
Mm-mm. I don't.
Um,
You can't have that, the God who is the anchor of Christianity and Judaism, without Hesed. It's not the same. It's not the same God,
not the same. Nope, not the same
because
at all.
and that's one of the really interesting things about why this is so important. And Strauss and Longman, in their definition in Baker's Expository Dictionary, which is where a lot of this is coming out of,
Hmm.
um, do such a beautiful job with this. And I want to read this quote that I I made really big and underlined it so I wouldn't miss it. Anna was laughing at my underlining, but they said this because I think this is really critically important to understand, because it's bit for them and for us now. So God's Hesed provided hope for Israel, for rescue from peril, like Psalms 33, 18 and 22. And it was the basis of trust in God, even during times of great suffering, Lamentations 3, 22 and 32, and is often invoked in Israel's plea for God to come to rescue and refuge, like Psalm 6, 4, 17, 7, 31, 16, and 21. God's Hesed expressed for his people also invoked praise from them, like Psalm 59, 16, 63, 6, 89, 1 and 2, 107, 1, 115, 1, and 118, 1 through 4. And the
Hmm.
refrain, his faithful love endures forever, is every line following in Psalm 136. Hesed is used a bunch of times in that psalm. So, as God is celebrated as creator, deliverer, conqueror, and provider. So, Hesed is huge. I just love the way they talked about that. It's providing hope in rescue for peril. It's the basis of trust in times of suffering. Like, there is so much we can pull out of that now. But Adam, I was wondering too, to talk about a little bit in this idea of Hesedness. How starkly shocking is this in the world where they are living, where Israel is, in contrast to their pantheons, because their gods. Talk us about the contrast that's happening there.
So it's definitely contradicts the other ancient Near Eastern cultures in that they're all about appeasement to the gods. Namely, that's it. They exist. Humanity exists, at least in the Mesopotamian world, the Mesopotamian pantheon. The humanity was created just to please the gods, feed them, and then they would receive whatever they wanted. Like if you wanted it to rain, you had to appease that god. You had to, but they also had the responsibility of feeding them, growing the food and everything, and then they would feed them. So Egypt was the same way. You had to, if you wanted something, you had to appease the gods a certain way. And Torah in the Hebrew Bible sort of flipped that on its head, because God doesn't need eating. He doesn't need to eat. He doesn't need anything really. So he just wanted a relationship, and that was spelt out through, and that's defined by chesed, which is completely absent from the other pantheons, because they had a it's called, the fancy word is a theomachy, in which the gods warred with each other. You see that absent from Torah, and at least in the creation account, you see that absent at the creation of the world. And it's just Chesed. He creates this world, humanity, everything in Genesis. You see the creation of both accounts, and then you see the sin, but then you also see Chesed. You see a form of Chesed in 3 there, where he clothes Adam and Eve. So, and that's all that stuff is completely absent from the surrounding cultures. You'd never see it. So, yeah, I think that's one of the things that drew me to this as well. When I first became a believer.
And you also see in this contrast, because God starts with a bang as the bringer of order, because this world was chaotic. And if you're spending so much time trying to figure out and appease the gods that are in your pantheon, and that's a whole other video I want to do, talking about this ancient Near East god pantheon and how God, Yahweh was so different. But it was just like, I remember with Dr. Jossberger in Torah class, she read this prayer to an ancient god from Assyria, I think, or Sumer, and it was Sumac. It was Sumerian. But she read this, and it was basically like, I don't know which God I've upset, and I don't know why or what I did, and I can't figure it out. And so I'm going to go offer every sacrifice I can think of, and basically invent maybe a couple more, trying to figure out why it is I'm being cursed and why everything is I mean, it was just this whole, you didn't even know there was, if something was going bad in your life, you didn't know, what did you do? Which God did you make upset? Like, it was, and they didn't have what we have now, as a separation between a spiritual life and daily life. That was not a thing that they would have understood.
Yeah, that didn't exist.
And so, so for them, religion was their existence. It was their life. There was no separation between, oh, I forgot my car keys, and so now I have to, have somebody come give me a ride home. Like, that would have been, which God did I make angry so that I would have forgotten those? Like, there was no kind of separation. So would you have a God who comes in, that brings order and shows mercy and provides protection, and just, I mean, the stark, it's just so amazing to me. It's one of the reasons I love this word Hesed so much, because it embodies that stark contrast of this ancient religious world between Yahweh and the pantheon that he is surrounded by.
It reminds you of the Shema as well, because the Lord bless you and keep you, Lord, and give you peace, and give you peace, and give you peace, there in Deuteronomy 6. And it's not even anywhere outside. Yeah, they have a phrase in Akkadian and Ugaritic, where it's
Mhm.
make a god or the gods keep you well, protect you and keep you well. So the idea is there, but the
Mhm.
guys really didn't care too much about humanity at the same time. So as long as they were getting what they wanted, it was fine. And Yahweh, the God of the Hebrew Bible, just flips that on its head. So and shows
Mhm.
that loving kindness that they needed. So
And I have a question about that too, because when we
yeah.
were reading some of that stuff in class, it to me it seemed like those other pantheon incantations of those things were more like something that was trying to be invoked in some sort of a ritual way to obligate that deity to care for them,
Mhm.
instead of a loving deity who freely offers this loving
Yeah.
care and all of this. So it was a very different even use of those phrases to try, to
Mhm.
in gratitude or blessing or whatever, that was totally from a different context.
Yeah. It was. You had
Right.
to like pull on their strings to get it
Yeah.
or whatever. So yeah.
Yeah, it just is. That's one of the things I love so much about reading ancient Near East stuff and ancient pantheons. It just makes God, makes Yahweh so much more amazing of how
Mhm.
different Yahweh is to all the other options. It's just amazing. So, which moves us into, if we have this God this Hesed God, and he gives us Torah. That doesn't sound to me like some sort of punitive, meritorious checklist of things that you're going to
Mhm.
do to get in trouble all the time, or how you have to earn God's favor, or you have to earn God's attention or love. So that's going to make his covenant and its instructions be very, very different. So I think
Mhm.
one of the things that one of the major things that we see is that these instructions, and this is where I really want you're going to dig into this with what you started with and really get us into
Oops.
this, because
Oops.
no, it's good, it's fine. It's good to start off with with a teaser of the good stuff at the beginning, and then dig into it really deep towards later on when we get into it. But I think Torah really is, instead of thinking of it as a law code, because I
Mhm.
generally now, every time I see the word law, I just say either Torah or instruction, because I'm just trying to and get people used to that. I've kind of banned the word law out of my vocabulary unless I'm talking about the 10 commandments, and then I will say law. But other
Yeah.
than that, I don't say it anymore, because it is, I think, one of those things that is a translation thing, starting with the Septuagint, and then the Vulgate continued it, and then the King James version, and then here we are. And
Here
then
we
it was
are.
also an understanding based on a whole bunch of church history nonsense that we're not even going to touch with a 10-foot pole around here. So we're just not going to that. But what is it then? I'm going to say that it is a set of instructions for two things. And we see this comes out of the 10 Commandments itself, that kind of frames the entirety of Torah. It is instructions for how to love God and love your neighbor. And
Mhm.
that's what all of Torah does, is it tells you how to do
That's
that thing. How do we love God and how do we love our neighbor?
that's
And
definitely at the
so,
heart.
yeah, it is. And it is that, and then it's does that, I think, in a way. I'm going to flip the order just for a second here for us, and then we'll
Yeah.
get back to the other thing. But I think it does that in a way that is liturgical. Okay, so that's a big scary word. A lot of Protestants don't like that word. We're going to say the word liturgy around here, and because I think it's important to understand, we're not talking about, you're going to read the Hebrew Bible and oops, you're going to wake up Catholic, or, you read the Hebrew Bible and you're going to wake up, Anglican or Orthodox, or like, it's not going to happen. Like, right. Okay.
Mm.
But
Jesus.
what this does, right. So a liturgy is basically a life rhythm. And the nature of Hebrew itself. This is one of the things that I learned really early, and I had a fantastic Hebrew 1 professor. His name is Dr. Kutz,
Mhm.
and he
I
used to
think I have
talk
his
all the
book.
time. Oh, he's
I think I
fantastic.
have his
He
Hebrew.
is.
I think I have his biblical
Yeah,
Hebrew book.
yeah, that's the book that I learned out of, because he and Dr.
Mhm.
Josberger wrote it, and I had both of them, and
Yeah.
they're
Oh, yeah. It is. Yeah. Now I make
fantastic.
the connection. Now I
Yep,
make that connection. Now the light bulb pops on. That's
there
why
you
I knew
go.
her. That's where I know the name from. I was like, I know that name. Okay,
Yes, well,
go on. I'm sorry.
yeah, but it's okay. He used to talk about all the time that Hebrew itself has a rhythm. Hebrew itself has a cadence. That's why you read it out loud, but it thinks in cyclical, rhythmic. There's a, and Hebrew is metaphorical, so it wants you to contemplate. That's why. So I hear this thing all the time, and Adam, I want you to just briefly respond to this. I just thought of it right now because it's one of my pet peeves. So I didn't bring it up before, but I'm going to bring it up now because I hear people who don't know Hebrew, who will say things like, things are written the way they are, limited in the Old Testament because Hebrew had a limited vocabulary and it did the best it could with the words that it had. Okay, which my response to that is poppycock. Hebrew is metaphorical, so it doesn't need a lot of words because it is thinking in pictures. And you're meant to
Yeah.
contemplate on the pictures, on the metaphors, to understand in communion with God what you're supposed to do. So, Adam, are they lacking imagination with a limited vocabulary in Hebrew? Like, what is
No.
going on with that?
No, I would definitely say certainly not, because then you've got onomatopoeia, you've got words that are onomatopoeic.
Mhm.
Onomatopoeic. I can't even say it, but you get what I mean. Onomatopoeias.
Yeah.
I can say that one, but I can't say the other one.
Yeah.
You see that littered throughout. You've got so many literary devices that they use in Hebrew, from merisms to chiasms to what we use today, similes, metaphors,
Mhm.
inclusios,
Mhm.
which are just bookend. It's a fancy term for bookends if people don't
Bookends.
know. So it starts off with one and then it ends the same thing. Chiasm
Mhm.
sort of operates the same way. So their vocabulary may not be, I don't know how many words English has, like what, 700, I don't know, upwards to
I don't
almost a
know.
million now. Um,
Too many, probably.
but that certainly didn't limit their ability to express chesed, for example, to express the love of God, to express how we're supposed to love our neighbor and God at the same time, and
Right.
ourselves. So I know
Mhm.
it is poppycock, to use your word. Uh, they were not limited just because they're no, not at all.
That no, there's so much beauty in some of these words that have, because Hebrew also, if you haven't taken Hebrew before, one of the other things that I learned from Dr. Kutz, because his approach to teaching Hebrew, we started with one of the first rules he said was learn the vocab card because it's a good place to start. And we're all like, what? And you don't get
Mhm.
very far in when you're like, okay, I get that now, because it's
Yeah,
whimsical. And context is going to make the single word have 97 possible meanings, but only 6 of them are going to show up in the lexicon.
there's
It
your range.
because
There's your range of meaning
right. It is
in
so
Hebrew.
crazy how, I mean, you get words like hesed. We won't even get started on raw. I mean, talk about a
Yeah.
word in Hebrew. The word raw is crazy. There's so many things where a single word, but it takes us 20 minutes and 15 words to explain one of their words because Hebrew is whimsical and it does what it
Hmm.
wants until it doesn't, and then it
Yeah,
doesn't until it does again. And so it
correct. Yeah.
very much is, it's very hippie in spirit. Hebrew is very
Yeah,
much
it
a
is.
hippie spirit language. It's so much fun, but so we don't need all this, as many words because you would lose the whimsy. I
Yeah, you
think that
would.
is built into Hebrew. Anyway, so back on track here. Sorry, I get sidetracking myself with rabbit trails on all
All
kinds of
good.
fun stuff,
All good.
all the good
All
fun
good.
stuff. So back to why Torah is instructions and not law. So we got the 10. There are very
Yep.
few in Hebrew, and in Exodus to Deuteronomy, there are very few thou shalt and thou shalt nots, which I think is just the
Correct.
10 commandments, if I remember
Hmm.
correctly. You can correct me if I'm wrong here, but
Nope.
so
That's pretty much it.
then you've got all that other stuff. So you've
Hmm.
got 600 and what, if you got the 10, so you've got 603 that are not thou shalt and thou shalt nots
Correct. Yeah.
or
Yeah.
instructions. Right. So Adam, like, this is a good place. Let's go back to what you started with and talking
Oh my
about
gosh.
how
Yeah.
does this
Okay.
work and why is it
Okay.
like that? Yeah.
So law collections are usually classified as civil or criminal with a prologue and an epilogue. And I think a good example of that is in Deuteronomy. And that's at its basic level. I also think that in the ancient Near East, and particularly in Mesopotamia, instructions, again, as we've already said, is certainly a better, more precise term to translate the word Torah. The instructions were meant to justify the king, as I said earlier, in his reign. And in Egypt, the focus was on ma'at, which is another word like chesed. Takes like 20 minutes to explain what it is, or which basically means the way things currently are, or the way things should be. And that sort of changes when we approach the Hebrew Bible. You've got the Torah and Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and those are usually divided between the casuistic law, which is the technical term for it, and the apodictic law, which is usually translated as "thou shalt not." The casuistic law is if you do something, then something else will happen. That's usually how casuistic law is. It's usually introduced with the preposition ki, kaf, and then yod. Whereas in apodictic law, it's usually lo, not our word for
Right.
lo, but the Hebrew word for
Right.
lo, the
The Hebrew
negative
word lo.
particle. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, and you see that mainly in the Decalogue, or which is another fancy word for the Ten Commandments. But the rest of the Torah is usually made up of those casuistic instructions. And I also think it's a good point to point out here that there are sets of instructions that do predate the Torah, namely the Code of Hammurabi. So that's what I mean when I say instructions predate. You got the Code of Hammurabi. You've got the I don't know if the Eshnuna laws predate it. They may come later. Then you got the Middle Assyrian laws, which come before it, and then on and on down the list. So we can see some considerable differences as well, namely on the grounds of ethics and morality when it comes to these instructions. But you also have similarities that exist, such as the goring ox laws of casuistic laws. There seems to be some sort of striking similarity with Mesopotamian law and the Hebrew Bible and Torah. In the goring ox laws, they're very similar. If you read Exodus and Leviticus and Deuteronomy when it comes to that. So it seems that at least in Mesopotamia, there are law codes that are focused on order as opposed to morality. And Torah seems to flip or invert that. And in the ancient Near East, then, we could say that the people are informed by a socially attuned conscience. As a result, we could conclude that ethical responsibility and not morality, as I've previously defined it, is the basis of conscience or law in the ancient Near East. So
That's funny. Okay. That's funny. Anyway, so with all, I love, see, this is one of the things I love about this conversation too, because we get to jump into, okay, so you mentioned the Code of Hammurabi, and we, kind of, alluded to there's, the other codes, the law codes around Israel. And so, Adam, did they steal everything from the Code of Hammurabi? Because this is
no.
what I think. Like, if you think about it, if everybody's living a similar semi-nomadic life, and you're all dealing with the same, a goring ox or a stolen ox in Egypt and in Sumeria and in Assyria and Israel, that's all the same problem. So,
Yeah.
is it reasonable to expect that everybody's going to have a completely different and unique solution to the same problem in the same area with the similar cultures? Or is it possible that maybe everybody thought, you know what, my deity would say that this is probably a good way to deal with it, and it might look similar between cultures?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what these law codes do, these instructions do in Mesopotamia and here, puts Torah in its ancient Near Eastern setting, and it would explain why there are similarities between these other instructions found throughout the ancient Near East. Yeah,
Right. And it's also at the same time going to highlight how Yahweh is different.
is different
So
at the
there's
same
a
time.
lot more similarity between the rest of the cultures around and what is happening with what Yahweh is telling people to do, because there are differences enough to make them, reasonable for the same region, same cultural, milieu that's going on around there, we'll say. But Yahweh's Torah is enough different to say, look, this God is different.
Yes, correct. Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. This God would have been different, like completely alien to, well, I wouldn't say alien, but well,
Sometimes
alien's
alien.
a loose term. But
Right.
it would have been a different god. Yeah, it would totally different
Mhm.
from, say, Marduk, for example, or Ishtar. Yeah.
Right. And like one of the other fabulous ways that we get to see this, and this is one of my favorite topics that Nick likes to talk about. I don't know if he's still with us or not. He was here for a minute, but that a lot of people that don't understand the ancient Near East culture and what's happening in that world throughout, at least through the cultures through Deuteronomy, let's say, with the very early time period where most of this was probably written, that people think, oh, well, look, God hates women. The Old Testament, Hebrew Bible hates women. Well, okay, so let's talk about that for just a minute, because a lot of what's going on in these instructions is so radical and revolutionary for that time period in those cultures that it is a massive revolution for the love, care, and protection of women.
Yeah.
So yeah, Adam, so give us a couple of examples, and we'll kind of like riff on that for a second.
I would say that it protects, the Torah literally protects women. I think some good ones are in Deuteronomy 22, which if it explain doesn't allow a husband to divorce his wife just to divorce him. Like, say she cooks his favorite dinner wrong, and then he claims divorce. Now I want to divorce now. Well, the law prohibits that. That's one good one, but if you keep going down, then you get the R word
Right.
laws, the uncomfortable ones down there at the bottom. I think it's
Yes.
at the end of the chapter.
Yep.
And it protects what's noticeable about these laws in particular. And I go here specifically because this is where people who think the Yahweh, the God of the Bible, is evil and vindictive and blah 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 and hates women and everything. So I go to these laws to point out, no, that's not really the case, because there are two scenarios in chapter 22 of Deuteronomy that explain that actually there are three. The first one is just if they're in the heat of passion and doing it, then if they're getting to know someone in the biblical sense, they're supposed to marry. Now, that's not really a shotgun wedding. They have to really think about what's going on before that. Or otherwise, he's got to pay the dowry.
Right.
And the dowry, even in the ancient world, is significantly expensive. So he would have to really pay. And then he would have to, on top of that, say that, oh, wow, I've got to marry your, So that was more of a deterrent to stop that. Secondly, is the one that involves the R word. I'm not going to say it, but we all know what we're talking about. If it's in the city and she screams, he gets the death penalty. She gets off scot-free. In the countryside, if neither of them scream, he still gets the death penalty, and she still gets off scot-free. So those are some examples of Torah or of Yahweh literally protecting women in those senses.
Yeah, and they also have a choice in that too. The women could say no. There is a provision in there where the women could refuse.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's safe to say, or at least it should be wise to note, that these are not cut and dry.
Right.
Like these are generalizations. This is if this happens, this is more the lines. Or I think Averbeck concludes in his most recent book, he says that these would, if we're taking it out to its full, if we're taking these casuistic laws to its fullest extent, that's what's in Deuteronomy, or at least in Deuteronomy 22 here.
And I think a lot of these if-then instructions, at least the way that I've come to understand them, as I've been, learning them through dealing with the prophets, because you deal with a lot of these in the prophetic work, that God understood how humans behave amongst each other. And so he's putting limits on it. You're going to do this anyway. This stuff is going to happen anyway. I mean, the 10 should eliminate all of this nonsense, but you're going to do it anyway. So here are the rules to minimize damage, because one of the big things we haven't talked about yet is that Torah is all about the preservation of life. God cares very much about life. You can see that there's a lot of things where in Torah, people are put out of the community for different things, for sickness, or for, if you do something you're not supposed to do, you're put out, but with the intention to be brought back in, because restoration,
Correct, yeah.
redemption is a big concern of God's in Torah. It's not just the New Testament, folks. God cares about bringing back those and restoring them to a relationship. In the Hebrew Bible, we got there first. Thank you very much. So it is. There are very few times, though, where you see some.
We
Hey,
got there.
I'll say it. I'll say it. I don't
I
care.
was thinking it,
Uh,
but you said
I'd
it.
say it. I say it all the time. Yes, a couple of my friends give me a hard time because I give them a hard time about Greek ruining everything. Greek ruined everything.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, so a lot of these things are there, but there are very few where the death penalty is the first immediate and only option, where you either
Mhm.
killed or put out permanently, and all of those endanger or take away life.
Yep.
Those are
Correct.
the
Yeah.
ones that you are not allowed to be restored, because it's about also protecting the community. That is a
Mhm.
very big concern. And most of the bulk of the Torah instructions are how to live in community and be a good neighbor. And so if God cares so much about that, and he's going to protect that. That's why you see some of those things like, what's his name? The K name. Just fell out of my head, where he steals keeps some of the spoils of war, wasn't supposed to, brings all that
In
chaos
Joshua?
on in Joshua. Yeah. And
Oh, Achan.
then, yeah, he gets speared. And they're like, you're like, what the heck? Why is he do? Well, because what he did would bring a contagion and affect the holiness, and it would taint the entire community, and God couldn't have it. And so I think it was his own tribe,
Yeah.
was
Own
the ones
clan. Yeah, his own
who,
clan.
yeah, his own clan killed him,
Mhm.
because it was protection of the clan. It was protection of the community. It was protection. They was protecting the life of everyone. And so
Yeah.
there's a lot of those kinds of instances where, like
You
the sons of Korah, thing opens, they get swallowed. It's for the
yeah.
protection of the community. Like there's not a lot of death that people get this assumption that there's a lot of death in the law, but that's only the drastic examples that are there to
Yeah.
warn people, don't be like these guys that did this kind of stuff. That
There's definitely restoration though as well when
Mhm,
someone violates profane space. You
mhm,
get burnt offerings in the morning and evening. That's really just to hope that the temple isn't, or at least the tabernacle at this point, if we're
mhm,
in the wilderness, isn't like profaned, so that God could still have that
right,
that chesed, that relationship with Him. So the
yep,
burnt offerings there to attract the Yahweh, and then they can bring like fellowship offerings, their sin offerings, reconcile themselves with God, etc. So there's always this restoration and redemption going on through the
right,
sacrificial system. So that's another form of chesed that you see. Whereas again, outside of all of this, outside in the ancient Near Eastern cultures, it was more about appeasement. We're going to sacrifice so we don't tick off the
mhm.
god, or we need something, so we got to pull on the strings again. It's completely absent.
Mhm.
I know I
And
sound like a broken
this
record.
no, that's okay. And you brought up a while ago, and I want to go back to that with the Hesed, because I think this is also really important with God's Hesed and protection of the community. Because, with the
Mhm.
bookends thing, the word fell out of my head again, but the structure with the bookends,
Inclusio, yeah.
yeah, inclusio.
Inclusio.
We see inclusio with the tabernacle, because you got the
Mhm,
tabernacle, the giving of the 10 and the Decalogue and a bunch of Torah, and then the tabernacle again. And I
mhm.
don't that's definitely not an accident, because you've got
No.
obsessive instructions for the tabernacle. Like, it's chapters and chapters and chapters of tabernacle. And that's where a lot of people get lost in reading plans. They're like, I'm going to read the Bible this year. And you get to the tabernacle and they're like, I'm out. Which, me,
Yeah.
I'm like, awesome. This is so amazing. Look at all this cool stuff in here. But, a lot of people get lost because there's a lot of real detailed instructions. But that's what surrounds what the instructions that they're given at Sinai. And why? Why is that so important? Because I don't know that I can think of, and maybe you can come up with one, Adam, but I haven't found one yet, a culture in that time where the deity planted himself right in the middle of camp. They all were up
Mm,
high, away from everybody else. They didn't
yeah.
want to deal with the nonsense of the humans. Just bring me
Um,
my stuff, and
no,
separated
they were
themselves.
yeah.
Yeah.
They were usually on mountains,
Hmm.
You see that with the Ugaritic or the Canaanite god El. He was on Mount Zaphon, that was his place, or he was at the place where two rivers converge, somewhat isolated from everyone. Marduk had he didn't really, he had a mountain, but I can't remember the mountain right now. But as far as it's usually involves a mountain or a river, isolated from everyone.
Mhm.
So it's interesting that Yahweh decides to live and dwell among his people because the other gods were not doing it.
And it was a
They were
mobile
either in the
structure.
sky or mountain.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they were at a permanent spot. Everybody come to me, and God's like,
Hmm.
"Nope, I'm going with you, and I'm going to be in the middle."
Yeah.
And
And I'm
so
leading
that's
you.
why,
So,
yes. So you've got this even before you get to Joshua, you've got the tabernacle smack in the middle, and that is the orientation for all of life for the whole rest of the time that we get to even into the Gospels, that 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 he is the Yahweh is the middle of everything. And the
hmm
camp is set up in Numbers 8. We get this in great detail. The layout of the camp, like that, you got the tribes on the north, the south. Like they assign parts. You got the priests in the middle and the tabernacles smack in the middle. And this is why
yeah.
protection of the community is so important, because the God cannot surround himself with unholiness. And so a lot of these instructions keep their hearts pursuing holiness. It's supposed to be when they're in community with God and in community with their neighbor, propelling them forward in holiness so that God can stay in the middle and dwell with his people. And that's why protection of the community is so vitally important. You let those contagions in, God can't dwell with them anymore. So it is really important that we are good neighbors with each other, because God is supposed to be with us doing everything we're doing even now. I would say that I don't think it makes a difference. Old Testament, New Testament, this is a
Yeah.
concept that's why the body of Christ is so important, and living as good neighbors with each other now matters, because the same thing, God cannot be where there is not holiness. So I,
Yeah.
I love
Yeah. You
this.
can't be in profane space. Yeah.
No, and we did on over on Faith Unaltered, we did an episode on sacred spaces, which was absolutely fabulous, and it was so much fun to do. And I want to go and I'm going to do another one over here and talk about that some more, and how, and that's another part of the tabernacle that is, and this community living that was so amazing. Everywhere they stop creates a sacred space. Like God is claiming all of this sacred space in all of this foreign God territory. It's just absolutely
Yeah.
fascinating and fun
It's pretty
when you
cool.
get into, yeah, it gets us, but that gets us off track again with
We'll get
some of
off track, especially because we touched on it
right.
I touched on it last night. But anyway,
Yeah, but it's fun stuff. It's really good. I mean, it's really good stuff to keep in mind, and context is important as well. So, but I want to
yeah.
go back to the idea of this liturgy thing, and
hmm
part of when we started with my definition was this is a praxis. So let's talk about that word praxis. So if you're not a high church liturgy person, okay, so the word praxis might freak you out a little bit, because a lot of people associate it with like Eastern Orthodoxy and Catholicism, and some of those higher liturgical traditions talk about this word. But really, so if we translate that for Protestants, that is what you're going to call like spiritual disciplines, and like living in spiritual development. Some of these terms that Protestants use here. It basically is a living out your faith every day. How do the things that you do point your attention and your affection back to God? That really is what praxis is. How do I live out my faith every day in everything? Which is what Torah was meant to do. And I think that is why, and I love, and I go on a lot about the Shema, because the Shema, there's this, I think, this misunderstanding that it's a checklist. Like, here's this list of things that you teach your kids, and I got to teach my kids this list. But the fun thing about the Shema, and in Hebrew, because you'll see these like things that look like opposites, like when you're laying down and when you're standing up and when you're, at your gate and at your door,
Oh
like
yeah.
there's all these things that look like that to us don't exactly make sense. But in Hebrew, what they're doing is they're talking about like if when you're lying down and when you stand up, like when you go to bed and when you get up in the morning, that's an inclusio. That means everything you do from the minute you do this to the minute you do that. So every minute of your day, you're supposed to be contemplating about God's instructions, because that's
Mhm.
going to focus your attention, your heart, your hesed back to God. So it is the Shema really is a prayer of liturgy to remind myself all day long that everything that I do should be in hesed relationship to God. So
Yeah.
like that's why I so am all the time growing in this. Like I'm pretty good, being pretty confident. Like it's Torah is supposed to be a liturgy. It really
Oh
is.
yeah. Yeah. In a nutshell, it basically is. The Shema. That's yeah. I've got nothing on that. That was yeah. That was perfect.
We had we had
Uh,
to in Hebrew 1 we had to memorize it, like so we had in Hebrew we had to memorize
yeah.
it. So I'm not going to say it now because that is a tongue twister, let me tell you. When you're
Yeah.
learning Hebrew, the Shema is quite the tongue twister. It can be. So I don't like to I don't like to read Hebrew on camera just because I usually end up getting nervous and embarrassing myself. So I don't do it
I
very
actually
often.
did it on
But
my channel back in the early days. I actually did it. I
uh,
read like the first few chapters of Genesis. I was like, I practiced a little bit and then got on it. And I did it
mhm.
live, thinking like people would show up. And I was so stupid. I felt so stupid. I was like, yeah, maybe I should just record and then just upload it and get like
Oh,
5 views and 1 like. So
I'll have to go back and like those because that's always fun
yeah,
listening to people read Hebrew. I just don't because I know my limitations. I just
I was gonna do Greek, but then my Greek like pronunciation, I was like, eh.
oh
I
my
mean,
goodness,
I've
yeah.
had Greek, but like,
So there's a couple things too that are built into this liturgical community idea that I want to touch on as understanding Torah, and it's kind of becoming a popular thing to talk about now with the feasts and the festivals and in when you go to a high liturgy church, one of the interesting things I learned and noticed and had a lot of fun with was how much Old Testament they read. I mean, you get 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 Psalms read in entirety. You get something out of out of Torah. You get something out of the Nevi'im, the prophets.
mhm.
Like they're at least 2/3 of the service in a high liturgy in a lot of high liturgy churches that I was at, it's all straight reading right out of big chunks of the Old Testament. And I'm like, I love this. This is good stuff.
Right?
But
And
it's it
it's mysteriously absent from Protestant churches. They focus namely on the New Testament, and
yeah.
every time I find a church, I'm like, where's the old? You can't have the new without the old. So
But it and I think that is that liturgy idea, this praxis idea, because if we understand how we're supposed to live as good neighbors. So if we think
mhm,
about all of starting with the 10, because that shows us here are the things that we have to do to love God. And then here are the things we have to do to love our neighbor, which interestingly, I think all, if not most, I think there's one that I would say this about. So the rest of them, there's 4 in particular for sure. Living with your neighbor that are about preserving life. So, do not murder, obviously, but
mhm,
do not bear false witness, because in Torah, if you stand up and lie about or misrepresent your
yeah,
neighbor, the consequences could be disastrous and
mhm,
be life threatening. There was do not hang on do not commit adultery, because the
mhm.
sentence for adultery was stoning to death. So that was
Yeah,
another death
yeah.
one. Yeah, and then there I can't remember. I'm terrible. I can't remember them all off the top of my head. Shoot me.
Covet. I think covet
Actually,
was talking about
coveting.
the latter, coveting.
Yeah, I think that's one I don't put there though. What's the other one?
Mm,
I can't remember. I should look it up, but I
was
closed that software. But anyway, but yeah, most of them are about preserving life.
yeah,
I should know them. I should have them up
yeah.
somewhere. I'm terrible, but the
And
10 are about preserving.
and
Go
they
ahead.
extended that to the animals around them. Like you couldn't just kill a deer or an
Right.
antelope or whatever, you had to ritually go through the
Mhm.
process to do it. So it was all, and then you'd present that back to God as life. So, um,
Right. And there's the reason why the slaughter of the animal for sacrifice was so specific of how that was supposed to be done, because if the animal suffered, that made it tainted and it wasn't eligible for sacrifice. Like you couldn't
right,
sacrifice
right.
an animal that suffered because it was tainted and it was therefore no longer an acceptable
That's
sacrifice to God.
that's why Malachi, I think it was Malachi, got ticked off at him because they were sacrificing blemished
Right.
bulls and everything to God. It was just
Yeah.
crazy.
Some of them were physically defective, but some of them had been tortured in the
Yeah,
slaughter. And so therefore that suffering made them, and that's something a lot of people don't think about. Like when you brought an animal to sacrifice, you were given the knife. So the sacrificer did the slaughtering and the priest did the butchering. They broke
yeah,
down after you killed it. So if you are inflicting and then I just, oh boy, we go crazy with that imagery, but we won't, because we're talking
yeah.
about Torah and our neighbor
We don't want to get a flag.
and
We
feasts
don't
and
need this flagged.
festivals, right? And feasts and festivals. Good grief. Now
Festival.
I'm doing it. Feast and festivals. There we go. I was going to get that word out no matter what. ADHD brain strikes again. Feasts and festivals creates this another liturgical rhythm that brings everyone together to focus the community as a community on Yahweh. Like it is so important that we do that, and that's why gathering together. And I think this is where ecumenical charity is so important, because it isn't just me and my little church. This is a gathering. I think more everyone needs to gather together more for various things. Like right now is a perfect example. It's Lent. So a lot of
Hmm.
high liturgy churches are doing these pan events where like a bunch of Catholic churches are all gathering together and celebrating Lent together. A bunch of Orthodox churches. There's a whole train for the next 6 weeks of Orthodox events planned around town here, where you can go to a bunch of different Orthodox churches and experience the Antiochians and the Greeks and the Russians. They're all doing stuff together, and there's I think Anglicans are doing some similar multi, pan and Anglican gatherings together during this time. People just kind of put aside, well, some of us do this and some of us do that, but hey, let's put that aside for these important things, which is what those festivals, one of the things they were supposed to do. All the tribes were supposed to all get together because they're supposed to be one big family, and we're supposed to celebrate together this covenant relationship that we have with Yahweh. So you know, Torah is so important to show us on so many levels how we're supposed to live in community with each other. That's why most of it is about that. It puts limits on the damage we do to each other, but it also teaches us how to celebrate together, which I think is so important. I mean, there is so much good stuff that you can mine out of it. So,
Yeah.
but we are, I think, coming up close to, we had a drop dead of an hour and a half. So we're kind of getting, we're kind
Oh,
of getting to close to that
that's
point in time. So
yep.
let's just kind of have some wrap up thoughts. Maybe if we have people have
Yeah.
some questions that they want to throw in.
Oh, okay.
Um, if people have any, so drop, if you have a Torah question, this is a great time to throw that in here. And I'll give people a minute while we just kind of think about so Torah, as we kind of just summarize our thoughts here. If people have any questions, Torah, I think going back to the definition that we kind of started with, the working one with, Torah is the narrative of the love of God given to his people as a liturgy for the praxis of faith, to live in relationship with God and with neighbor, to bring those outside relationship with God into relationship with God, with that love in God lived out, which I think we didn't get to as much, but
No.
the Exodus, when that happens, this is really interesting, and one of these things in Hebrew that this might get us in trouble also with the algorithm or something, but and people I think there's a misunderstanding in our modern context of this idea. So, let's take a deep breath first before we get into this. The Exodus, as they're coming out, a lot of what's happening there in Hebrew, Adam, and you can kind of briefly go with this for a minute with us here and kind of explain this. But what's
Mhm.
happening there, Hebrew in thought, at least for sure, but linguistically, this is a transfer of ownership. They were owned by
Yeah.
Egypt at that point, and that ownership is transferred. God says, nope, I am buying you out of Egypt, and now you belong to me. You are owned by me. So it's a transfer of ownership. And I think there's a misunderstanding that it's just like unlocking the cage door and everybody run free like a bunch of uncaged chickens or something.
Yeah.
Like
No.
this is not
No.
what's happening. This is something where God is saying, you are now mine. There's a
Hmm.
transfer of ownership, which oddly enough sounds surprisingly like some language we see in the New Testament with Paul
Yeah.
when he says that you're bought with a price.
Yeah.
I'm wondering there
Yeah.
might be a link there.
There might be a connection there, especially
Uh-huh.
for the term the goel. Well, that's in Ruth, but it's the same thing. Like the kinsman redeemer. Of course, there's
Yeah.
no purchasing of Ruth, but like with Exodus, the term used there is I think it's gaal in the kal form. So that's gaal is the Hebrew word for to redeem. He redeemed them from Egypt, so they were slaves in Egypt,
Yep.
and then they became slaves of Yahweh after. And the Exodus is sort of baptism, the going through the Red Sea, if you will, is
Right.
that baptism into a new covenant. I guess you could say new covenant, in the Hebrew Bible. So, and like, that's foreshadowing, of course, what would happen
Right.
with Jesus, and his death on the cross, transferring into the new covenant and buying us out of sin. And now we are slaves of righteousness instead of slaves of sin. So, yeah.
Yep. And that's where you see partly why you see the creation of the priesthood. God's like, I transferred ownership. You belong to me. Now I get to pull out a portion for myself.
Hmm.
And that would be the priesthood. That's what becomes the priesthood. And then they have a very specific function. And then that gets carried over and echoed into the New Testament. I don't think the priesthood,
Yeah.
I mean, we're not burning animal parts and things anymore. Like that
No,
sacrificial system is not necessary anymore.
no.
But there is still a function for those who are set apart in service for God. So I don't think that goes away either.
No.
But there's just
Uh,
this. Go ahead.
I was going to add that there's the part in there in Romans 12:1 and 2 where we're supposed to present ourselves as living sacrifices seems to echo the sacrificial system and how we are presenting life to God. We are supposed to be presenting ourselves as a living sacrifice to God as well. So, it full circle, like this is all connected. So,
All
um,
right. Okay. I did see a question here. All right.
oh,
Jesus said, "It is written in your law," a quote from Psalms. Psalms is a category of wisdom literature, though. So what's up with that? So, Adam, does BJ, do you have a
oh,
specific
do you have a specific
reference for
psalm
that?
or I
Because do you have a reference for Jesus as a verse where Jesus said that? Do we have a specific
yeah.
um where in the New Testament did he say that? That would help us with some context. Because I still have that open. Let me move that over here. It's hard to pull out. I unfortunately haven't memorized the New Testament yet. In John, I say you are God's. I am not sure. A lot of times you will see references, if not direct quotes, to Torah in Psalms because they are talking about and struggling with living out this Hesed relationship with God and with each other. In John 10, he said, in John 10. So
Okay.
let me look
Trying to
here.
figure out where that is in the Old Testament, since he didn't give an Old Testament verse.
Yeah, I said it's a
He's just listing
psalm.
a New Testament.
Yeah.
Oh, Psalm 82:6. Oh, is he talking about Psalm 82:6? I said you are gods and sons of the Most High, all
Yep.
of you.
That's what he's talking about. Yeah.
Okay, that is if you guys know your Heiser, That
Mhm.
is a divine council verse, and that should not be, it's like divine beings is how I would interpret that or translate that instead of gods. You're just beings, some sort of beings. They could be critter beings, as a friend of mine says. They could be divine beings, they could be demons. So it's just anyone in his council, is someone anyone in his council is an Elohim, but he's not the Elohim. He's not the magnificent plural, which is only attributed to Adonai or Yahweh.
But I think in that is that the which verse are we in John 10? I'm still looking for it.
Oh, in John 10.
That's what he said. It was that was quoted in John 10. Okay, yeah. It says John 10:34. Jesus answered
Uh,
them, "Has it not been written in your law? I said you are gods." If he called them gods to whom the word of God came, and the scripture could not be broken, did you say of him whom the Father sanctified and sent to the world, you are blaspheming, because I said I am the Son of God? So that he's talking about verse 33, 34, verse
okay,
34, 34 and 35. So this is not written in your law. So it's, yeah, he's quoting, not written in your law. So I'm not, I'm going to leave the Greek to somebody who's had Greek much more recently than I have. But yeah, he says that I was written in your law, and then he quotes Psalm 82, which is interesting.
yeah. So what's the I am the Father of one? Is that the passage? Okay,
Um,
so he's talking about I am the Father of one, which he finally makes a divine claim in verse 30, I am the Father of one. And then the Jews were going to stone him for it. And then he says, I have shown you many good works from the Father. For which one of those do you stone me? He answered, it is not for good work that we are going to stone you, but for blasphemy, because you being a man make yourself God. Jesus answered, is it not? Then he says, is it not written in your law? I said, you are gods. If you call them gods to whom the word of God came, and scripture cannot be broken, do you say of him whom the Father consecrated and sent into the world, you are blaspheming because I said I am the Son of God? So again, the reason why it's okay, that makes sense. So the reason why he's quoting Psalm 82 is because he's directly like referencing the divine council in Psalm 82 or First Kings 22. And they haven't got the power that the council has under Yahweh. I think that's what that's referencing.
okay. Yeah, I'm not
That someone is greater
right.
on earth.
Which,
Someone is greater than they. So
but I'm wondering what that exactly in Torah that's referencing, because that in mine isn't got.
in Torah, that's not, I don't think
Um,
that's referenced in Torah in the five
but
books.
is Psalm 82 reference got a Torah
Mhm.
connection to it? That's what I'm wondering.
Oh, and I see what you mean. Yeah, and the
Yeah, on my
other than
part,
that, that's the only connection I can come up with is
is
that
Psalm
it's
89. I don't see the verse itself. I don't have any, no cheat hyperlinks in there to Torah. So that I don't know why I would say, unless, well, okay, because sometimes Torah could refer to the entirety of the Hebrew Bible. It would just be saying, so if you, I can see where the confusion is there. Okay, BJ, this is where
okay,
I see
that's
the
why.
confusion, because
'Cause
Torah can be used in that context, can be used to be the Decalogue, the 10. It can be used for the Torah, the first 5. It can be used as the Hebrew Bible in its entirety by itself. So it's got 3 layers of meaning. So he's just saying,
that's why.
does not your Bible say? And then he quotes Psalm 82. That's the
Okay,
confusion, because because they translate the word Torah as law. That's a complete mistranslation right there. That should say, does not your Bible, instead of law, because that is the word there that
no,
connects. That should be Torah in the Old Testament, that is translated namas, I believe, in Greek. You're going to have to check me there.
mm,
Because, but I think that's a translation conflation from the Septuagint
yeah,
that's
it's
carried over
nomos.
into, yep, so it's namas. So
Nomos is used
namas
there.
is, yep, and that's Torah in Hebrew, is namas in Greek, which translates law, which is the confusion. He's not quoting the Torah as a set of instructions. He is quoting Torah, meaning the entirety of the Hebrew Bible. So that's where the
Yes.
confusion is, right
Okay.
there. There we go. See, solved it.
Woot.
That was good. That took a minute to get there, and it finally clicked in my
Yeah,
head. Wait a second.
I was confused because I thought he was talking about the 5
Mhm.
books, and I'm like, it's not in the 5 books. So,
Right, but
all
then
right.
I just remembered, like, oh yeah, because I just watched yesterday, the Bible Project had a short on ways Torah is used, and it just that popped into my head, and I was like, that's right, because it also refers to the entirety of the canon of the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament. They
Gotcha.
would also
Yeah.
call Torah. So that's where I think that's where the confusion lies, and that's how Paul would refer to it. He would say Torah. So sometimes I think I would wonder, it'd be interesting to go back and look at that, actually, to do a study on that, and maybe I could get Nick Quint to get the Rev up here, and we could talk
Yeah.
about where Paul is saying law. When does he mean the actual set of instructions is in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy? And when he says law, is he talking about the entirety of the Hebrew Bible? That would be a really interesting conversation to have. So anyway, but I
Definitely.
told Adam we would be wrapping up by 8 o'clock my time, which is 11 o'clock his time. It's late out there. So
Yeah, it's almost
um
11, if not 11.
all right. Yeah, it's got 9 more minutes. So we got 9 more. So but Adam, thank you so much for coming. I had a blast, and hopefully
I
everybody
did. It was
enjoyed
fun.
nerding
I
out about
enjoyed myself.
Torah a little bit. And so, yeah, don't forget, everybody, when we're done, go over, if you're not subscribed to Lingus Amo, there's a link in the description down there. Go check out Adam's channel. There is if you want to know about the ancient Near East and the cultures in the ancient Near East, that's the place to go. He has got the best stuff over there about the ancient Near East world and all of the stuff that's happening around Israel and how they're in the world that they're living in. And a lot more of this will make a lot more sense looking at some of this really great content over there. So what is coming up for you? Yesterday, you did an amazing video with inspiring philosophy. I watched that. It was great.
I did. That was like my 3rd time on his show too. We did we went through a video on Billy Carson and his crazy claims. That was one time. I can't remember the very first time. I was nervous as heck though. First time.
Yeah, yesterday's was good.
So coming up though, to answer your question, coming up, I usually try and release shorts on the weekend, one during the week and one at the weekend, on very quick topics. And usually I draw from those and elaborate on usually a 20-minute video once a week. That's what I was doing. That was my routine. I want to get back to that, but I haven't really thought about what I want to do for my first major video, like my 20-minute video that I want to do, but it'll probably have something to do with the Pentateuch. So you go back to your, what you love doing first, right?
Right.
Like Peter
Absolutely.
fishing, except that was different circumstances, but you get it.
Yep. Good stuff.
So,
Yeah. So, and then you're also, because you're still also working on your second master's degree in
yeah,
other ancient Near East languages. You got Hebrew and Greek already down, but now you're working on what,
yeah.
Aramaic and Sumac,
I got
right?
Akkadian right now. I'm finishing
Akkadian.
up the
That's it.
Akkadian course this year, and then it'll be Aramaic this for the fall semester, and then I'll have
Mhm.
my languages done for that. So I should finish in the next year or two, probably next year.
And then that'll put us suffering together at PhD work at the same
yes.
same time also.
Yes.
Oh boy. I would have to fill you in on my change of dissertation and thesis topic, because it's going to be a heck of an interesting one. So, but I'm not going to, you don't want to leak that stuff out to the public before you get it written, because you don't want somebody else to steal it.
Yeah,
before
you don't want someone else to steal it. And
yeah, I know. So
you got to harass a reviewer two to actually do his job. So
right. So I know that's still, I got actually, my thesis proposal is due soon. So I have to get on that, because I'm completely changing tracks, and like, it's a radical shift in what I'm changing over to. So this is going to be fun, but I'm pretty excited. about some good stuff. So let's see. Coming up on here, I've got, oh boy, I got some really good stuff. This is going to be, you got 4 more of these coming out on Torah. So there's a whole bunch more Torah stuff coming. And then I've got from we are getting the band back together and doing another Why Leviticus Matters. So we're going to talk some more Leviticus, and that's going to be good because this next one that's coming out in March 22nd, I think, we are getting into the ethics of Leviticus. So what does it mean in the ethical side? So for Christian ethics, what is Leviticus? Why does that matter? So that's going to be fun. And then we're going to do part 3 sometime probably in May-ish, I would guess. And that's going to be Jesus in Leviticus, yes or no. So we're going to get into is Jesus in Leviticus and do some of that. And then I've got from Faith and Altar, Josh Davidson and Garrett, his last name just fell out of my head. Cosmic Corner on Faith and Altar is going to come invade When Deep Calls Deep, and we are going to talk about storytelling and talking about the importance of storytelling and understanding storytelling. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And then I've got Spencer Owen is coming back, and we're going to do another video talking about reading the hard parts of the Old Testament. And this time we're focusing on the prophets and lamentations and imprecatory prayer. So we're going to talk about some of those things that are hard to read. So, and since I'm a little dinky channel that's not monetized, we can get away with a lot more than you can on a monetized channel. So that's going to be fun.
It's good to fly under the radar sometimes.
It is. And then I've got another one that I can't remember. Oh, yes. So the big announcement. Yes, this is exciting. So I gave when I was at ETS. No, I'm excited about this because this is fun. So when I was at ETS, I got to meet a bunch of people with Nick, and one of them was Dr. Leighton Flowers over on Soteriology 101. And he had me come on his channel. But before I did that, I gave him some homework, and I dared him to read the Old Testament in the Tanakh order, which he had never done before. But he did it. He actually did. And so he's going to be coming here at the end of the month on March 28th. He and Nick are coming, and we're going to talk about how did that go? How did he, did it make a difference? Did he, I already got some sneak peeks from Leighton. He already told me a couple things that he really, he appreciated by reading it in a different order, because he never would have done it had I not dared him to do it. But we're just going to talk about his experience and why that matters. Why does it matter that at least once you should read the Hebrew Bible in the Hebrew order? Because there's some narrative things going on there. There's some things that really make a difference for understanding the story. And and I know that Adam, this won't shock you at all, but he was surprised how ending it with Chronicles instead of Malachi made more.
It does. Chronicles ends the.
Because that's the last of the bookend there. In the Hebrew Bible, Hebrew thought, in the way that was put together. So we're going to talk about that. So that'll be fun. Leighton's going to come and do that. So that's cool. The other. I think that's my list. And then I've got some stuff going on Faith and Altered. We're working on the Ecclesia series some more, and Hebrew Bible breakdown. Next week, we are going to talk about all that structure stuff. So we're going to talk about chiasms and inclusios and narratives and all that nerdy stuff. That's good. So I love Amy. Awesome. I love how excited this is funny, but yeah. So this is what happens when I'm talking about Hebrew Bible and Old Testament stuff. Like all of it to me is exciting. Even the boring stuff. I find it fun and exciting. So
there is no boring stuff.
That's true. I'm like one of 6 people who actually gets excited about reading the instructions for the tabernacle. So I'm like, but I love it now that I understand it and why it is that way. Like, like Hebrew and and Leviticus. I'm like, yeah, let's go back and let's do, I could just read the Pentateuch over and over again. There's so much good stuff in there, but it makes the prophets better. And
that's where I spend the majority of my times in the Pentateuch. So
which is part of the shift that I'm making. I'm leaving my boys, the prophets, and behind, and I'm shifting over into the Pentateuch for my thesis and dissertation. So it's a big
Big
shift.
change.
So yeah, and that's one of the things, like Amy's saying. I want people to start loving the Old Testament, to love the Hebrew Bible, because there is so much. I mean, to understand when Jesus shows up and is God incarnate, if you miss how much God is Hesed, that kind of gets flattened. I think we've done a big disservice listening to certain people talking about unhitching from the Old Testament.
Yeah.
God have mercy on their souls for saying
Yeah.
things like
We won't
that.
mention names.
That's right. We won't mention any names, but there is so much beauty. And one of the things, like, I learned more about prayer in the Old Testament and from the prophets. I mean, those dudes get raw with God. I mean, Habakkuk,
Yeah.
hi, hello. You get some of these people that just you see raw, you anger, you see hatred, you see there's a whole bunch of stuff, and God allows it. It's just,
Mhm.
the beauty. And one of the things that Spencer and I have talked about last time, we're going to talk about it again when he comes back, about how to read the hard parts of the Old Testament. You have a sovereign God who has created everything from nothing. And it just, how amazing you see the portrayal of God in the Old Testament. But there's a lot of gross and icky, yucky stuff that people do. And what does God do? God takes this sovereign power that he has the right to wield anytime he wants, and he puts it down with open hands and open arms and says, "Come back to me." And that's the call of the prophets. Just come back. All will be forgiven. Just come back. And I mean,
Yeah.
if
It's amazing.
it
I can't come up
is.
with a word for it. Ineffable. I don't know. I
It
can't come
is.
up with a word for it. It's insane.
I
Like
don't
good
know, but
insane.
to see that God, once again in this pattern, puts down and pours himself into an incarnation state and becomes fully human to show us, because we can't quite figure it out. Okay, I'm going to come down and I'm going to show you how to do this. I'm going to do it myself so you have an example to follow. Is absolutely mind-blowingly amazing. Like, why should you love the Old Testament? Because it's going to make the New Testament even better. That's
Yeah.
why you should love the Old Testament.
Pretty much. Yeah.
That's
It
that's why people
definitely
like
does.
that's why we nerd out about it so much, because it makes the New Testament that much better. So anyway, we are over our time by a couple of minutes. So Adam, thank you so much. I had a blast. I
Yeah.
really hope you'll be back again, because we have
It was great. Of
so much
course.
fun nerding out about this stuff.
Of course. Yeah.
So next week we're going to talk about all things the 5 books of the Pentateuch. We're going to get into structures and narrative and all of the.
All
We're going to get
right.
back into the Shema. We're going to get back into chiasm, chiasm upon chiasm upon chiasm.
Yeah.
They are everywhere. Hebrew loves chiasm. We're going to talk about patterns. We're going to get into fractals. We're going to get into all kinds of crazy nerdy stuff, and it's going to be amazing. So, but as always, thank you all for coming. I had a blast, and hopefully, really, what I want is to inspire people to love the Old Testament, because every day we should be journeying to dwell deeper and deeper in our relationship with Christ. And that's where all of this points. So I hope you'll have just a beautiful, wonderful week, and keep journeying to dwell deeper and deeper in your relationship with God every day. Go and be blessed.